Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of BacklogBusters, where I'm busting out my gaming backlog one video at a time and letting you know if after all these years, these games are worth playing today. In today's episode, we're finally figuring out who that tall orange robot is from Super Smash Bros. With Metroid Zero Mission. Why after all these years am I going back to play Metroid Zero Mission? Well, I've finished one Metroid game before, and it was the remake of Metroid 2, titled Metroid Samus Returns, that came out on the 3DS in 2019. But besides that, the series felt like a huge blank spot in my gaming history. I never knew anyone who owned the original Metroid or Super Metroid growing up, and the first console I owned was the handheld Game Boy Color, the grape variant. Side note, why can't I buy a Switch in this color? Then later I got the Game Boy Advance, and I remember a single friend owning a Metroid game. It was Metroid Fusion, and that's the one time in my childhood I remember the 2D Metroid series being brought up at all by anyone I knew. Then the first non-handheld console I owned was the GameCube. In 2002, when Metroid Prime launched, I watched the opening at a friend's house, but I guess I wasn't interested enough to even borrow their copy. Looking back at the releases in the fall of 2002, it appears that as a child I made the bold decision to ignore a critically well-received, highly rated game published by Nintendo and chose to instead pick up Matt Hoffman's Pro BMX 2, which I've never heard anyone else talk about. But at that time it was the closest thing to the Tony Hawk games that I was allowed to own, because Tony's games all listed blood under their T for Teen rating, which was off limits. Then, during the Xbox 360 generation, I got really into indie games, ones that, unknown to me, borrowed a lot from the Metroid series, like Shadow Complex, Aquaria, Guacamelee, Strider, and a lot more. This style of game has been one of my favorites ever since, with stellar examples like Hollow Knight, Momodora Reverie Under the Moonlight, SteamWorld Dig 2, and Wonder Boy The Dragon's Trap, not only being some of my favorites in this style, but also some of my favorite games of all time. So it felt more than overdue that I finally played through the Metroid series from the start. The first Metroid was a joint development effort by Nintendo's development teams R&D 1 and Intelligent Systems. R&D 1 is best known for the Metroid, Super Mario Land, and WarioWare series, while Intelligent Systems is known for developing the Paper Mario, Advance Wars, and Fire Emblem series. The first Metroid game was released in Japan on August 6, 1986, later on August 15, 1987 in North America, then finally January 15, 1988 in Europe. Following Super Mario Bros. Linear platforming and Legend of Zelda's non-linear adventure, Metroid was built to encourage exploration, but with permanent ability upgrades. The first Metroid game is famous for also including a late-game reveal that your main character Samus is a woman, a shocking revelation for the time when almost all video game stories seem to revolve around a princess being captured and requiring rescue. The Metroid series went on to see a sequel, Metroid 2 Return of Samus, released for the Game Boy in 1991. Then came the most well-reviewed Super Nintendo game, at least according to an archived game rankings page, Super Metroid, which released in 1994. Next, in 2002, we saw the first double year of Metroid, with Metroid Fusion on November 17th, and then the next day, followed by the first in the first-person Metroid games, Metroid Prime. Then, where we cut off this timeline for now at least, 2004, the last double Metroid year, with Metroid Prime 2 Echoes and a remake of Metroid 1 titled Metroid Zero Mission, which is what I'll be covering today. It's a full remake of the first Metroid with huge additions like a map, new abilities, and a lot more. Yoshio Sakamoto, who's worked on all the 2D Metroid games and is kind of seen as the face of the franchise from what I can tell, had this to say to IGN when asked about the remake. We wanted to show people who had never played a Metroid game prior to Metroid Fusion the roots of the Metroid franchise. That this is what Metroid is, this is the style of gameplay that Metroid sprang from. At the same time, retell the story of Samus's original mission. With my extremely limited exposure to the Metroid series through the years, this seemed like the perfect place to start clearing off the Metroid games from my backlog, starting with the things I liked about this game. Zero Mission has a great introduction to the story. It kicks off with mood-setting music, as blue sci-fi text types out above these cool comic booky animations that play to set up the story. I was a little lost as to why Samus just wakes up already down here, but also without any powers at all. She didn't crash, her ship isn't shut down, she's already found her way down here once, then I guess took like a little power nap, and this is the story of you waking up and getting your bearings post-nap. Either way, the game does a great job of teaching you about its core gameplay loop from the start, by letting you run to the right first, like most would in platformers of the time, only to hit a dead end with Samus lacking the ability to crawl somehow. You inevitably head to the left where you find the first upgrade in the Morph Ball, which coincidentally lets you fit through small gaps. But even if you skip the description of the upgrade, you actually lack the jump height to leap over the pile of rocks nearby that you came over. The only way through is to learn to use your Morph Ball to progress. And this kicks off the Metroid formula that I'm familiar with from lots of indie games I played throughout the years, with you exploring a map, finding dead ends that you can't get past unless you return with a needed upgrade, and this makes each new upgrade feel substantial, not only in terms of gameplay changes, but also in expanding the world around you and how you traverse it. The only negative word that I hear associated with Metroid-style games is backtracking. Since the whole loop does involve you hitting dead ends until you eventually have enough upgrades to freely explore every route, you will backtrack through lots of areas that you've visited before, but for the most part, I love this loop because gaining an upgrade makes me immediately want to run off and go use it on an area that I remember being blocked off earlier. The cracks in this formula and where I think backtracking can be a negative really depend on how the map is implemented in these types of games and how well new upgrades are foreshadowed, and we'll talk about a few of those things later in the video. After the blue text and comic book intro at the start, that's kind of it for the story for a while. You're largely exploring this strange planet alone with nothing but a map filled with enemies to keep you company. The music that plays during your time in this first area, Bryn Star, feels like a high-energy workout mix for Samus as you navigate through an underground cave system, but both the scenery and the music give you hints of something a little uneasy in these out-of-place, high-tech save and map rooms scattered throughout the caves. And when entering ancient ruins containing these creepy bird statues, which, am I the only one that sees these as a version of this Sonic toy that holds your controller? I feel like they're missing an opportunity for a Metroid version of these. Then, as you leave the first area of Bryn Star and head to Norfair, you get the first cutscene in a while, as a fitting description of Mother Brain awakens and starts watching Samus. With this, the music starts to get a little slower and a little more mysterious. Each new area you enter follows with more alien scenery and creepy music, and it's just a great way to set the tone as things get more and more dangerous on this strange planet that you're exploring alone. When you start this game, Samus doesn't even have the ability to bend over and crawl through a gap, barely able to get around, much less defend the galaxy as a bounty hunter. After you find your first upgrade, the Morph Ball, just laying out in the open, you'll start to stumble upon these creepy birds, apparently called Chozo statues in the manual, which will almost always give you a new upgrade after curling up in their arms. You'll gain rockets, bombs you can lay in Morph Ball mode, and much more throughout the game. And these are always the most exciting discoveries, as they'll send you searching the map and your brain for any dead ends you might have run across that can now be opened up. Outside of these upgrades, there's also small expansions you can collect that increase your carrying capacity for bombs, rockets, and more that are scattered everywhere throughout the world of Zebes. These remind me of the sprout things from Breath of the Wild in that they're everywhere, and they give you a really small boost each time. These can vary between fiendishly well hidden to just sitting out in the open, which is a good mix, I felt. Though you'll ideally need a lot of these Mishal expansions for bosses, but more on that later. I was also thrilled to find that not all the upgrades are just for combat, but there's a decent amount of platforming upgrades that you'll collect along the way. Almost every upgrade in this game is substantial, and you'll find a huge difference from the start of the game where you're avoiding enemies and conserving rockets compared to the end of the game where you'll be sprinting in leaps and bounds through the environment and blasting through everything in your way. I think, for the most part, Zero Mission does a good job at foreshadowing these upgrades as you go along. Sometimes you'll encounter a series of ledges that are just too high or too far apart that might be reachable later in the game. Or you might encounter a suspicious-looking dead end and fire rockets or bombs at it, which reveals a symbol that corresponds to an upgrade you'll gain later in the game. In most cases, dead ends like this become more and more helpful as your map expands to give you hints as to which directions are still inaccessible and which areas have just been blown wide open by a new upgrade. You'll grow in powers, abilities, as well as mastery over your environment as you inevitably learn the layouts and secrets of the world around you. This is one of the big reasons I've enjoyed these styles of games in the past and am really enjoying this game. Who knew that a simple map would be so important? I've tried to play the original version of Metroid several times on various ports through the years, and I never made it far. Without some general idea, direction, pointer, I just felt completely lost. I felt like there was too much distance I was covering without hitting a dead end in these seemingly endless vertical and horizontal hallways. I understand that some people find the need to draw a physical map on graph paper and pencil in the original NES version charming or fun even, and nothing against those who enjoy it, but I do not. The NES version feels too much of an action game for me to pause at every door and sketch a diagram. Maybe in an RPG where you move slowly through the environment, one direction at a time, and enemies aren't flying at you constantly, but to me this feels more like a limitation of the time when Metroid originally came out. And not that this game was built to show you the joy of crafting a hand-drawn map, or that the map making was an experience key to the game's enjoyment. The map in Zero Mission is one I've seen several times, and just didn't realize it. I've seen this same style in Shadow Complex, Momodora, and many other games that are just almost direct copies of this Metroid map style. Glancing back at the chronologically released game, Super Metroid seems to have invented this style of map, and it's pretty much perfect, which would explain why it's been reused in so many indie games. This remake of Metroid 1 borrows the map style from Super Metroid, and it makes for such a breezy, natural exploration, as I'm able to immediately see which directions I haven't explored, which doors block me, and what color code lets me know when to come back later. I can tell which rooms have a secret still yet to find with an empty circle marker, and which are completely explored with a single dot, basically like a checkbox. Finding and using map rooms along the way will point you in the next direction you should head. Now, I've heard this secondhand through podcasts, other YouTube videos, but I get a general impression that people have complaints about hand-holding in later Metroid games, mostly in the direction of Metroid Fusion and Other M, I think, but this is just the right amount of guidance for me. Give me some direction so I don't turn the other way and bang my head against a wall in the wrong area. I could see an argument that because this does technically mark a specific room, some would rather be able to choose to either turn this off entirely, and I guess you could ignore these map rooms, or maybe get a larger target that doesn't pinpoint the exact room. But this marker helped me a lot, especially because sometimes the route to a given room is anything but obvious and requires a hidden path to reach the goal. It also gave me the flexibility to know where the next story beat was and allowed me to choose to walk in the opposite direction if I wanted to explore for more missile expansions before progressing the story. Maybe it's my nostalgia for the Game Boy Advance style of pixel art, but this remake of Metroid is stunning. Samus looks better than ever, especially compared to the NES version, and even compared to the Super Nintendo version, Super Metroid, for me at least. Zero Mission in general is pretty comparable to Fusion, but this looks like the best of all the 2D pixel art Metroid games to me. The scenery of each game is extremely varied, which is true of the NES version, but there's so much extra detail here, which leads to better foreshadowing and hinting at areas hiding secrets in a way that feels mostly natural. The music is incredible as well, taking those classic Metroid themes but sprucing them up and doing a kind of reunion tour through the first game's soundtrack. The cutscenes and intro give great scene setting, and even though I know Metroid on the NES is known to be this solitary experience that's mysterious, it's nice to see these glimpses of story sprinkled in that are snappy and look incredible. This remake does more than just pretty up the visuals, as it borrows a ton of the improvements found in Metroid 2, Super Metroid, and Metroid Fusion to add things like diagonal shooting, a stable frame rate, a map, actual save rooms without a password, as well as new upgrades from both Fusion and Super that by the time of Zero Mission's release were canon parts of Samus's arsenal. Then you have the tweaks and changes just for this game. Each area from Metroid 1 is here, with the same general layout, but expanded with new rooms, secrets, upgrades, and expansions defined. Zero Mission additionally adds a few new areas to the map, as well as an optional easy and hard mode, and the ability to unlock the original NES Metroid at the end of the game. There are some limitations to this version. Being on the GBA and limited by buttons, you've still got to awkwardly press select to swap some weapons like in the NES version, and also your ability to shoot diagonally by holding the left trigger doesn't feel great to me, but does let you aim diagonally while standing, and that's a plus. But unless you've got a certain nostalgia for the NES Metroid, this is by far the best playing and looking version, and every quality of life upgrade is very appreciated. Now let's talk about some of the things I disliked, starting with getting lost. I know I just talked about maps and backtracking and was very positive about both in this game. Well, there's some stumbles in here for sure. First off, and we'll see if this changes as I play more of these games in the series, but it feels like there's just a language to Metroid games I'm not getting, because I'm sorry, some of these rooms have the absolute smallest difference in sprites to signify that a certain wall can be bombed, rocketed, or blown up in some way. And you know, If they want to hide a rocket tank and expansion in spots like this, fine. There's something for the 100% completionists out there who like pain, I guess, but some paths and items are hidden in such a way that I verbally several times uttered the phrase, "Wait, that's how you get there?" or "How was I supposed to know that?" The most important lesson I learned was shoot rockets and drop bombs on everything. Just pepper floors, walls, ceilings with bombs all the time, because you never know what expansion, upgrade, or even main path could be hidden on the screen at any time. Sometimes with seemingly like 1 pixel out of place, or I don't know, some background element supposed to tell me that a rocket's hidden here? I like to think through my time playing I got better at this, and much like how you start to notice a pattern in the Zelda or Mario games, where some block or bush seems just weirdly out of place in a way that you can't describe, and you just know it holds a secret. Similarly, I felt myself learning the Metroid style of hiding secrets in plain sight, and was able to find the secrets quicker and easier as the game went on. And then in some instances, the bomb and shoot everything strategy just didn't work. I felt like I placed an explosive on every square inch of a few dead ends with no idea how to progress, and had to consult a video walkthrough because guides aren't specific enough. This was annoying, and after discovering how to progress, I just left frustrated. Now, quick spoiler warning for something that maybe someone will take pride in finding on their own, but I'm more putting this out as a PSA for anyone who decides to play this and runs into the same wall that I did. So skip to the next time code if you want to avoid it. This lava is fake? Maybe it's only unclear to me, but wow, this really tripped me up. Okay, spoiler over. I do have a few small complaints about the map. The layout between areas was hard for me to get a grasp on because there wasn't just a full map view. You get this little layout in the corner and an overlay, but nothing where I can see all the maps and rooms stacked on top of each other to get an idea for maybe a large noticeable gap in the maps, or an area left unexplored to get an idea where I should head next or where to search for more expansions. The minimap is also smaller than I'd like. At only 3x3, I find myself opening the pause menu map a lot, and having a larger minimap in the corner would have certainly been nice, which I can see examples of in other games of this type and other games in the series, but Zero Mission is meant to be played on a small Game Boy Advance screen, so I understand the limitation. The last thing is probably a little controversial, but as the game went on, the map rooms that give you a point in the right direction started to be less frequent. And I wish that there was a system to ping or point to the next objective, because sometimes I'm in a whole different area trying to fill out the map and don't realize I'm technically supposed to have been in an entirely different area to get a required upgrade. It's a small thing, but I would love an option to get some pointer for the times that it felt like I had explored absolutely everything, but somehow managed to overlook the one small correct path, or if I'm just in the wrong area entirely. Or, better yet, just so the map shows any doors you found and marks their color so you know what types you can currently open, what if you could expose a brick that can't be broken without a certain upgrade and the map just automatically set a marker there? Or if you could manually set a marker there to remind yourself to come back later. This next dislike is a small one, but to refill your health and weapons, you can either use a Chozo statue that you've already collected an upgrade from, which are kind of out of the way, or you can do this. Just stand in front of these Mario pipes and endlessly shoot until you're full. I can't help but wonder why the save stations don't refill your health and ammo. Maybe it would make the game less difficult overall, but there are several areas before bosses that just have these infinite enemy spawning pipes set out to refill your health and ammo. These monster pipes don't make the game more difficult or interesting. They just feel like a tedious way to refill health and ammo, and overall just seem kind of odd and a backwards solution to this kind of problem. Along the same lines, during some boss fights, it seems like you can only do damage with rockets. Now, you could use a charged shot in some cases, but it's slow and tedious. If you had filled up your rockets beforehand, you'd probably melt the boss's health. I'd die in these fights intentionally sometimes, because it was taking so long, then go grind missile ammo to fill up, come back and have no trouble. Again, much like with the health grinding, why is it so tedious to refill rockets? Why not make it easier to fill up your supply, especially for a boss fight? Now, with all that in mind, how did I feel about this game overall, and would I recommend Metroid Zero Mission as a game that should be on your backlog? On the good side, it's a blast to play. Exploring and battling your way through this planet is eerie, action-packed, and full of secrets. It's a beautiful remake, and it's incredibly satisfying to fill out your map, collect upgrades, and increase Samus's combat and platforming abilities. On the bad side, you may feel a little lost as you try to see the patterns in the walls around you, with some that I had to seek outside help to get past, and refilling health and ammo can be tedious at times. This all comes together to form a recommendation of, yes, this game was a blast, and honestly I'm disappointed in young me for not picking this up in 2004, and for not playing any other Metroid games even after I enjoyed Samus Returns. This game holds up incredibly well. It feels on par, if not better, than most modern Metroid-style games I've played. And if you've never played a Metroid game, I'd recommend this be your starting point. I wouldn't really recommend going back to play Metroid 1 on the NES unless you've got a certain nostalgia or keep a printed off map beside you. But even then, Zero Mission feels much more polished, refined, and worth a spot on your backlog. And even though I've been extremely positive about this game, I'll throw out my normal message that my opinion on these games is not meant to tarnish any fond memories you have of playing them. And if you loved or still love this game, or these games, please tell me why in the comments below. I'd love to hear about your experience and talk about the parts that we both liked. Now, if you're interested in playing either of these games, Metroid on the NES or Metroid Zero Mission, where can you find them? Well, Metroid in its original NES version has been re-released on the Game Boy Advance as a standalone port. It's unlockable in Zero Mission. Metroid Prime actually had it as an unlockable as well. And the Wii, Wii U, and 3DS eShops also received a version. But with the Wii shop shut down, the Wii U and 3DS eShops shutting down next year, your best route is on the Switch. With a Nintendo Switch Online membership, you gain access to a selection of over 60 NES games, including Metroid, which have the 4 save slots per game, you can save wherever you like, and a rewind feature to reverse a cheap death, which is very helpful on Metroid 1. Metroid Zero Mission was released on the Game Boy Advance, and it was only ever re-released on the Wii U Virtual Console, which again was shut down next year in 2023. Please, Nintendo, put out a Game Boy Advance Metroid collection, or add a Nintendo Switch Online Game Boy Advance collection to the subscription plan, and make sure to include this and Fusion in the pack, because it makes no sense to me that you released Metroid Dread last year, but have almost no currently supported consoles that can allow people to play these Game Boy Advance games. But that's it for this episode of BacklogBusters. Have you played Metroid or Metroid Zero Mission? What did you think? Are these must-play games in your opinion? Do they deserve to be on others' backlogs? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to talk about it. Also, let me know if you have suggestions for what game I should clear off my backlog next, and I'll work to make a video on it. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that little thumbs up button and subscribe. It helps me out a lot. And if you want to get alerted whenever I get done editing my next video, don't forget to hit the bell icon. And as always, thank you so much for watching. See you in the next video.